The movie begins with Gary, an officer on his usual routine. This time, Gary has to repossess a car with overdue taxes. Ironically, the car belongs to Maddie, his ex-wife. Maddie rushes out of the house trying to keep her car. Even though their relationship is over, Maddie tries to flirt with Gary, hoping she can soften him up. However, her attempt immediately fails when another man steps out of her house. Gary, who was initially somewhat receptive, suddenly becomes indifferent. Noticing Gary's change in attitude, Maddie hurriedly explains that the man is just her cousin from Italy. But the man's behavior doesn't convince Gary. Without much conversation, Gary chooses to finish his job. He takes Maddie's car, leaving her standing there, frustrated. With her car gone, Maddie is forced to go to work on roller skates. On her way in front of a cafe, Maddie spots her car parked outside. She knows Gary must be inside the cafe. Without hesitation, Maddie tries to reclaim her car. However, her attempt only complicates the situation further. Maddie is warned. If she causes any more trouble, there's a risk she might lose her car permanently, and even her house could be repossessed if the taxes aren't paid soon. After the chaos, Maddie arrives at her workplace, a small shop. A customer walks in to buy a drink, but Maddie casually tells him the shop doesn't open until noon. The customer points to the clock and even offers extra money, hoping to be served. However, Maddie, who is already upset, ends up annoying the customer, leading to a minor argument. The shop owner eventually steps in to calm things down. The angry customer leaves, suggesting Maddie should be fired for being incompetent. During her break, Maddie chats with her two friends, Sarah and Jim. Both of them know Maddie is struggling financially. Jim jokingly suggests that Maddie sell her organs to become rich quickly. Meanwhile, Sarah has another idea. Sarah finds a job listing offering a car as a reward, as long as Maddie agrees to be a date for a teenager. Maddie reads the requirements carefully. One of them states that the women applying must be in their 20s. The thought of winning a car tempts Maddie, especially since she desperately needs money to save her late mother's house. Maddie begins to consider the offer. Sarah supported the idea, but Jim disagreed. He thought Maddie was strange for choosing something he considered ridiculous, like accepting that offer, instead of renting out her house to earn money. The small debate between them ended with Maddie still considering unconventional ways to get out of her financial troubles. The next day, with her old roller skates, Maddie set off for Percy's parents' house. After an exhausting journey, Maddie finally arrived in front of a luxurious house that left her in awe. In the yard, she saw the fancy car promised as a reward if she completed the task. A man named Laird and his wife Allison greeted Maddie at the door. They invited her in, but Maddie, forgetting to take off her roller skates, struggled to walk and almost fell. Inside the house, Maddie awkwardly apologized. Maddie got straight to the point. She admitted that even though they were looking for a candidate in their 20s, she was already 32. However, Maddie believed that was actually her strength. She was confident her experience could help guide their son, Percy, in this matter. Laird and Allison were initially hesitant, but after hearing Maddie's explanation, they started to believe she was the right person for the job. They began to share their story. Their son, Percy, would be attending Princeton University next year. The problem was, Percy had no friends, no girlfriend, and spent most of his time lying in bed playing on his phone. They were worried Percy wouldn't be able to socialize at university. In fact, they feared that if Percy wasn't introduced to social and emotional relationships, he might develop in an undesirable direction. That's why they hired Maddie to get close to Percy. Maddie understood their concerns and agreed to help. However, Laird and Allison gave her a strict warning. Maddie must not tell Percy that she was part of their plan. Everything had to look natural, because if Percy found out, he would immediately reject Maddie. As a first step, Laird and Allison suggested Maddie meet Percy at the animal shelter where he volunteered. Maddie agreed to the plan. The next day, Maddie arrived at the animal shelter looking stunning. She made sure Percy was the one to assist her. Maddie asked to see the most aggressive dog there, claiming she wanted to adopt it. Percy brought Maddie to Milo, a former tracking dog. Percy explained that Milo was highly sensitive to certain words like, "go again." Curious, Maddie immediately said the phrase. Milo reacted wildly, nearly causing Maddie to lose her balance. Percy, trying to calm Milo down, looked tense at Maddie's unexpected behavior. Percy explained that Milo was highly sensitive to certain words like, "go again." Curious, Maddie immediately said the phrase. Milo reacted wildly, nearly causing Maddie to lose her balance. Percy, trying to calm Milo down, looked tense at Maddie's unexpected behavior. A short while later, Percy seriously considered whether Maddie was fit to adopt Milo. The result? Maddie didn't meet the criteria. In fact, Percy thought Maddie was more suited to being someone whose dog would get confiscated. Maddie just laughed at the decision and didn't mind it at all. However, she insisted that Percy go home with her. Feeling uncomfortable, Percy opted to ride his bike instead, but Maddie quickly loaded Percy's bike into her car. During the ride, Percy began to feel something was off. Maddie's car didn't follow the route to his house. On top of that, Percy noticed various sharp weapons in the back of the car. His panic grew, and he tried calling 911. Unfortunately, Maddie swiftly snatched his phone. When they arrived at Maddie's house, a frightened Percy sprayed pepper spray into Maddie's face. Writhing in pain, Maddie tried to explain that she wasn't a kidnapper. She even reminded him that all her personal information had been provided at the shelter. Hearing this, Percy started to feel sorry and decided to help Maddie. As things calmed down, Maddie joked that Percy was too handsome, which was why she brought him to her house. Percy blushed, and unexpectedly, it was Percy who asked Maddie out on a date the next day. The next morning, Maddie was busy preparing for her date. She asked to borrow her friend Jim's gym van for the night. However, Jim refused because he needed the van himself. In the middle of their conversation, Jim suddenly pointed to a woman passing by. It turned out she was an old friend of theirs who was now living a successful life. Jim whispered that the woman had a sugar daddy and jokingly suggested Maddie do the same if she wanted to get rich quickly. Maddie immediately rejected the idea firmly, saying she had no interest in being a sugar daddy's mistress. That evening, Percy showed up for his very first date. For Maddie's sake, Percy mustered the courage to go to a bar. Maddie, who was already comfortable in such places, casually ordered a strong drink. Meanwhile, Percy, an innocent guy unfamiliar with such settings, just asked for a Pepsi. Unfortunately, the server informed him that they were out of Pepsi and only had Coke. Percy reluctantly accepted the drink, and they started chatting. Maddie tried to steer the conversation toward more mature topics, but Percy remained naive and didn't catch on to Maddie's hints. Just as things were starting to get comfortable, Travis, Maddie's ex-boyfriend, showed up. His face was full of disappointment. Travis confronted Maddie, accusing her of leaving him without a word. On top of that, he warned Percy that Maddie was manipulative and heartless. After finishing dinner, Maddie and Percy decided to head home. However, during the drive, Maddie spotted a beautiful beach in the distance. Excitedly, she suggested they make a quick stop. With a mischievous grin, Maddie suddenly told Percy to take off all his clothes. Percy, of course, refused, feeling awkward and weirded out. Maddie felt slightly insecure after his rejection, starting to wonder if Percy wasn't really interested in her. But Percy quickly reassured her. Sincerely, he said, "Maddie, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." Hearing that, Maddie's face turned red, and without hesitation, Percy took off his shirt himself. "Come on, let's go swimming," he shouted as he ran into the water. Maddie could only sigh with a small smile before following him. While they were happily swimming, 3 teenagers suddenly appeared and grabbed their clothes left on the shore. Maddie, realizing what was happening, didn't back down. With courage, she confronted them head-on. The scene turned into a heroic act straight out of an action movie starring Maddie. With skills seemingly out of nowhere, Maddie managed to snatch their clothes back while teaching the teenagers a lesson. After finishing, Maddie returned to Percy, holding their clothes. But the moment grew awkward when Percy began to see another side of Maddie. "You're too rough," he said seriously. Maddie, feeling offended, decided to leave Percy behind. Before leaving, Percy asked for his phone and clothes, but Maddie, casually, handed him only his underwear. Confused, Percy climbed onto Maddie's car hood, trying to stop her. Instead of giving up, Maddie hit the gas and drove off. Percy, clinging to the hood like a lead actor in an action film, braced himself until bad luck caught up with them. They passed a police car on the road. Panicking, Maddie stepped on the gas even harder, speeding away. The dramatic chase ended when they finally arrived at Maddie's house. Percy, instead of being angry, seemed thrilled. "This is the most extreme experience I've ever had," he said, laughing. Still full of energy, Maddie invited Percy to dance in her living room. Their dancing grew more intense over time, and the atmosphere began to heat up. Maddie started teasing Percy, and Percy, feeling nervous, began scratching his back. "I can't do this," Percy said while scratching his back. Maddie chuckled softly and playfully checked Percy's back for no apparent reason. Once Percy calmed down, Maddie told him to turn around, trying to tease him again. However, Percy, with his romantic nature, said, "I don't want to rush things. I want everything to feel special." Hearing that, Maddie gave him a sweet smile. Even though their plans didn't work out, the mood between them remained warm. In the end, they spent the night chatting and laughing, leaving behind a funny and surprising story from the beach. A few days later, Maddie and Percy finally met again after some time apart. The reunion felt warm, and they spent the day walking around and joking like any other young couple. As they sat in a quiet park, Percy suddenly asked about Maddie's parents. At first, Maddie just gave a small smile, but eventually she decided to be honest. Maddie shared that her mother had been seriously ill in the past, and during those difficult times, her father was completely absent. It turned out that the relationship between Maddie's parents was a secret, filled with hidden truths. Maddie believed her father had never wanted her to be born. He just gave us a house and some money so that my mom and I would stay away from his family, Maddie said quietly. Her father even forced them to keep Maddie's existence a secret from his extended family. Maddie tried to accept the bitter reality, but when she became an adult, she gathered the courage to send a letter to her father. Unfortunately, the letter was never answered. Maybe it was never even read. Maddie recalled how devastated she had been at the time, crying alone in her room. Percy, after hearing the story, paused for a moment before gently comforting Maddie, as if to show her that he was there for her now. After that, they continued their walk, trying to shake off the heavy mood. While strolling around the park, Percy accidentally bumped into his former nanny from when he was a kid. The nanny greeted him with a big smile, then suddenly threw a boomerang and told Percy to go fetch it. As Percy ran off to retrieve the boomerang, the nanny approached Maddie with a serious tone. "If you're just playing around with Percy, you'll have to deal with me." Instead of feeling intimidated, Maddie simply smiled casually. "Playing around? I've got way more in mind. I'm aiming for some exciting dates with Percy," Maddie said with a small laugh. The nanny just shook her head in disbelief. Sometime later, Maddie was visited by Jim and Sarah. They came to discuss something important. Jim immediately asked, "Maddie, did they give you that car yet? If not, you could take them to court, you know." Maddie replied honestly, "I haven't done that with Percy yet, but I think I'm starting to really like him. We even have another date tonight." As they were deep in conversation, a man named Doug suddenly showed up. Maddie looked confused at first, but Doug smiled and said, "Don't you remember me? We went to school together. I used to be an athlete back in high school." Maddie frowned, trying to recall, and then it clicked. "Oh right, you're Doug, aren't you?" Doug nodded and immediately explained his purpose for coming. "I heard you're struggling with money. I can help by selling your house. What do you think?" Maddie, hearing that, became furious. "Get out of here, Doug. I don't need your help." Maddie firmly kicked him out. That evening, Maddie and Percy were on their way to their date. After some time, they finally arrived at the restaurant where they had planned their special night. As soon as they walked in, Maddie, knowing Percy was great at playing the piano, teased him to play a song. At first, Percy refused with an awkward smile, but Maddie kept insisting until he gave in. Reluctantly, Percy walked over to the piano, sat down, and began pressing the keys, filling the room with music. It turned out Percy's piano skills were extraordinary. His beautiful voice captured everyone's attention in the hotel. Maddie sat still, her eyes sparkling as she listened to Percy sing her favorite song. "How did you know I love this song?" Maddie asked, surprised. Percy gave a small smile. "You mentioned it yesterday, so I immediately learned it to sing for you," he replied casually. Maddie was touched, and her admiration for him was clear on her face. However, the mood changed when a woman named Natalie, an old friend of Percy's, suddenly appeared. Natalie and Percy instantly struck up a lively conversation, laughing together like two old friends who never ran out of stories. Maddie began to feel left out. To make matters worse, Natalie unknowingly assumed Maddie was a friend of Percy's parents, which made Maddie even more upset. Jealousy was written all over her face, especially when Natalie invited Percy to a Princeton alumni party happening that night. After Natalie left, Percy tried to comfort Maddie. "It takes 5 hours by train to get to Princeton. If I go, maybe I'll come home every weekend to see you, or you can visit me there," Percy said gently. But Maddie quickly shook her head. "I don't like long trips," she replied curtly. Percy looked disappointed at her response. In the end, Percy decided to go to the party alone. On the way to the party, the atmosphere between Maddie and Percy was awkward. Once they arrived, Percy went in alone without inviting Maddie. At first, Maddie waited outside, but as she grew worried, she decided to enter the party as well. As soon as she stepped in, Maddie felt out of place. This was clearly a party for young people, not somewhere someone her age should be. A few college students she passed even whispered among themselves, assuming Maddie was a bored teacher. As she walked further in, Maddie noticed a teenager live streaming. Without hesitation, Maddie approached and said, "Trying to act cool, huh?" which immediately made the teen record Maddie while laughing. Maddie then approached a group of girls hanging out in the corner of the room. "Do you know where Percy is?" she asked. One of them casually replied, "Oh, Percy, he's upstairs with Natalie." Hearing that, Maddie quickly made her way upstairs, her steps determined to stop whatever was happening between Natalie and Percy. That night, when she found them, Percy had already taken a pill he shouldn't have. Panicked, Maddie immediately tried to help him, desperately working to get the pill out of his mouth. After a few tense moments, she managed to remove it. But things got worse when the parents of the student hosting the party approached them and kicked Maddie out. They claimed Maddie was too old and didn't belong at a Princeton University student party. Maddie, feeling insulted, responded with a heated argument, and Percy, unwilling to let it go, defended Maddie as well. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough, as the parents still kicked them both out of the party. In the car, Percy suddenly said he was ready to take things more seriously with Maddie. He even claimed he was ready for anything. Maddie, momentarily shocked, listened as Percy explained, and then he confessed, saying he loved her. "I love you," he said sincerely. Hearing that, Maddie felt moved, but she reminded herself that Percy was drunk, so she didn't want to act on it. Percy, not wanting to push her, simply smiled, and the two of them went home separately. The next morning, Percy woke up with a renewed spirit and told his parents that he was going to get a driver's license and start driving his own car. Percy also proudly revealed that he now had a girlfriend named Maddie, even though Maddie was a bit older. But Percy felt comfortable and happy with her. Percy's parents were happy to hear this until they learned about Percy's decision not to attend Princeton University. Percy explained that he didn't want a long-distance relationship with Maddie. Upon hearing this, his parents became worried and insisted that Percy should still go to Princeton. Percy refused and stormed out of the house. Laird and Allison, Percy's parents, concerned about their son's future, decided to call Maddie and offered to give her their car. Even though Maddie hadn't done anything with Percy yet, she was very grateful for the gesture. However, unbeknownst to them, Percy overheard the entire conversation through the Tesla car system connected to the house. This left Percy feeling even more confused and conflicted. The next morning, Percy planned something big. He drank alcohol recklessly, and then suddenly Maddie arrived after being invited by Percy. Laird and Allison were shocked to see Maddie there. Percy pretended not to know that Maddie was part of Laird and Allison's plan. But in reality, Percy intentionally humiliated Maddie in front of his parents. After that, Percy met up with his friends, and together they took the car that was supposed to be a gift for Maddie. Mercilessly, they destroyed the car without hesitation. After returning from the woods, Percy seemed gloomy and refused to see Maddie or his parents again. Worried, Maddie followed Percy to his room. Without saying much, Percy approached her and almost hugged her. At first, Maddie resisted, but seeing how down Percy was, they ended up having a heartfelt conversation. However, Percy couldn't hold it together for long. After just 3 seconds, he drifted off into his thoughts again. Looking a bit confused, Percy said that he knew everything, including about Maddie's car being wrecked in the woods. Maddie tried to explain that she truly cared about him, but Percy still told her to leave. The next morning, Maddie was surprised when Gary showed up delivering the wrecked car. Gary said it was Maddie's car since it was registered in her name on the official documents. Meanwhile, Percy was angrily confronting his parents for constantly interfering in his life. Percy suspected that his parents were meddling too much. Even during his basketball games, he felt like his victories were due to their involvement. And when a kid bullied Percy at school, that kid was suddenly expelled. Percy knew his parents had a lot of influence, but he wanted to live independently. Meanwhile, Maddie, feeling lonely, started talking to another guy. Unfortunately, the guy acted foolishly and even tried to set her up in a trap. Frustrated, Maddie kicked him out. A few weeks later, Maddie kept trying to contact Percy through letters and calls, but Percy never responded. Feeling hopeless, Maddie eventually sold her house because of rising city taxes. Maddie planned to visit Percy's home, but Percy's parents wouldn't let her in. They told her that Percy was attending an event at Princeton University. Without hesitation, Maddie decided to go there to see Percy. When Maddie arrived, she tried to convince Percy that their relationship was serious, and she didn't care about what his parents said. However, Percy still didn't believe her and planned to leave in his fancy car. Maddie, not wanting to lose Percy, jumped onto the hood of his car and tried to stop him. But after Maddie nearly fell into the water, Percy finally realized that he was also worried about her. From that moment, Percy wasn't angry anymore and started to trust Maddie. He told her that he'd be back in town for Thanksgiving. Maddie, who had already sold her house and was moving to California, felt really sorry because she couldn't be with Percy. After returning from the beach, Maddie surprised Sarah, revealing that she had sold her house to Jim. She did it so Jim and Sarah could live in the city happily. A while later, Percy finally left for university, said goodbye to his parents, and promised he'd come back for Thanksgiving. Maddie took Percy to the airport and proudly told him that she had a new boyfriend. It turned out her new boyfriend was a former police officer. Percy, hearing that, became a little awkward, but it turned out that Maddie's new boyfriend was Milo, her dog.